Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today we will discuss S Maugham's short story episode. That's a very interesting story. Actually, it's a love story, but the twist in this story is quite interesting. You might have not seen any movie or drama like that, as he has mentioned this love story in this short episode. So let's start discussing, and let me tell you again that Maugham, he is particularly known in his writing for human psychology, that how human behave in particular situations. So let's start with this again. In this episode short story, he's again telling us about human psychology, that how we behave when we are in love or when we hate or when we are fed up of something. So let's start how this summary or this story is about. Story is in this in most of the stories of Maugham, he actually himself is the narrator, but in this story he is playing a passive role. Like the story which he is telling us, it's not faced or encountered or experienced by the author himself, but experienced by Ned Preston. Ned Preston, the first name I have written here, is the name of friend of author. Ned Preston, he is a well established person, not very rich, not very poor, but he has so much wealth that he doesn't need to do any job or any sort of work. So what Ned Preston do? He is a kind of a social worker for prisoners. Like he frequently visits jail, he meets the prisoners, he talks to them, he takes their messages to their families, then he brings messages from their families to them. So actually he makes them, alive, and a kind of in fact, he is himself not a criminal. He has never committed any sort of crime, but he is involved in this social activity. It's a kind of social welfare. So, and it was quite common in those days in England. So, Ned Preston was doing it. So, he had experienced Ned Preston, this person, he had experienced many stories in prison. Once he was telling us, when this author is sitting, he says that it was a group, he was telling us the stories of the prisoners. And the story he starts, a short story. He says that once a person, he was a habitual criminal, and every time, whenever he was taken to court, his wife appears, and she gives a statement, she gives and takes an oath that at the crime place her husband was not present there. So almost in 3 to 4 cases she has saved her husband, but in one of the cases, when the court, her husband was under trial, and the judge asked her to come into witness box and tell the court that where her husband was when the crime was committed. And the criminal, her husband, he was quite sure that his wife would save him. But to his surprise, his wife, clearly, she negates that she knows him. Like she actually says that she doesn't know anything about the case. So in this way, her own husband was sent to jail. So this was a kind of a funny story that Ned Preston had told to the group of people who were sitting there, and author was also one of them. So while talking about such short stories, narrator says, this author, he says that Ned Preston has told us a story that I want to tell you all. Now, here our story starts, this episode. So he says, this Ned Preston, my fellow, he was a common visitor to prisoners, and he's told me a very interesting story that I want to tell you all. And he is trying to justify exactly as it has been told by Preston. So author says that there was a boy, his name was Fred Manson. Fred Manson was a very handsome boy, I mean tall, handsome, his styles quite appealing, and he had not fallen in love with a single girl, so he keeps on changing his girlfriends. Like you can say that he was a kind of playboy, and he was very attractive for ladies, apparently. And his duty was the job which he was doing, that was to deliver letters, like he was a postman. So what happens one day, this Fred Manson, he was delivering his letters in a street. Suddenly a girl came running to him and she said that, take this letter, I want you to post this letter because it's very urgent. When Fred looked at the girl, she was really very pretty and he was impressed. And because he was habitual to impress girls, he passed a beautiful smile to her, but she didn't notice. Now they had a conversation, like a general conversation. He's asking her that you are a very beautiful girl. She says to him that she says thanks to him, and then he again, try to show her that he's a handsome boy, that she had also noticed, but she gives an impression that she doesn't care whether he is handsome or not. So, after a short discussion, their meeting is over. This postman Fred, he is gone. In the very next day, he comes again back to the street. He looks for the girl, and she was not there. After that, after 2 3 days, he came across to see her again, and both of them they met. And he said that I want you to go along with me to some theater or to watch, a drama or enjoy outside. First she refuses and then she accepts. She says it's all right. Now the name of the girl is Gracie Carter. About Gracie Carter is a student. She is studying in London University, and her father is a businessman. She belongs to a well established family. But she is quite impressed from the looks of this Fred Manson. Both of them they start going somewhere, spending time, but it is mentioned in the story that they did not cross their limits. So it was a kind of, first it was kind of friendship, and then they turned to be good lovers to each other. Now, what happened when they were moving all around, when they were spending time? Fred Manson, he finds appropriate time and he says that, thinks that he should expose his love to her. So he exposes his love and he says that I'm in love with you, and I don't know that would you marry me or not. But she accepts his proposal. First, she refuses, just like as the usual women they do or the girls they do. But after that, she accepts his proposal. Now, the problem was that she was a university student, educated, belonging to a well established family, uh, having good parents. But as far as Fred Manson was concerned, he was not having any, family members, and he was just a postman, a quite a, too much low in status as compared to this Gracie Carter. Now, both of them they think that what should be done or what should they do. Gracie Carter she says that I would talk to my parents and they will decide that we should marry or not. And she says that I will try to convince them. Now, what happens? She goes back to her home and she tells her parents that I'm meeting someone. First, they were quite surprised that their daughter is meeting someone, but they don't know. But then they said, it's all right, it's your time for marriage. And abruptly, his father asks that probably you are meeting someone who is in your, he must be in your college fellow. He must be your college fellow. She says, no, he's not my college fellow. Then his father asks that what does he do? She says that he is a postman. When his father listened that his daughter, who is the only daughter, and she is in love with a postman, he gets quite furious, infuriated, upset, frustrated that what kind of sentences or what kind of thinking my daughter has. Even Mrs. Carter, she was also quite upset with the wording of Gracie Carter. Both of them, they were upset that uh, why she is in love with a postman. Now they say that abruptly, as it happens, that you can yourself imagine that if a girl who is in love with a person who is low in status, who is not educated, who is not qualified, she goes home and she tells her parents that I'm in love with a boy who is not even in any way equal to her, then suddenly, abruptly, uh, the reaction of the parents is quite obvious. So same was the reaction of the parents. They were quite upset. First, they tried to convince her that you should not think like that, telling them that you are the only daughter of us. We have a reputation in the society. When people will come to know that their daughter, our only daughter, she is having affair with the postman, and she is going to marry him, so it will be quite insult for us. So they try to convince her emotionally and practically, but she refuses. She says that she will marry him at any cost. Whatever happens, she doesn't care. Now, what both of her parents, they decide at the end. They said, okay, uh, we will meet him. Bring him home, and we will meet him. We will discuss. We will observe him, that is he good for you or not. So when he comes home, to their home, he was quite good in as I have already told you about him, that to impress others he was quite favorite in these things. So when he talks to his parents, both of them, uh, they were much impressed with the manners and the words used by thinking of Fred Manson. But again, they were quite upset that he is just a postman, and it would be insult for them in the society that they are going to marry their daughter with a postman. When Fred Manson was gone from their home, this Mrs. Carter, she says to George Carter, her husband, she says, "Whatever you say, but he is handsome." Now, Mrs. Carter here representing the typical female psychology, women's psyche. Like, as women, they get impressed from the appearance of men. So she is impressed. She is less practical. No, she is less practical and more emotional, just like her daughter after meeting Fred Manson. So what happens? They approved the marriage. They say that okay, if you want to marry him, it doesn't matter. Both of them, they were very happy. And on Sunday evenings, this Fred Manson, he brought a car, and both of them, Gracie Carter and Fred Manson, both of them, they went out on every Sunday in a car. And whenever Gracie Carter asked him that from where you get this car, he every time responded that I got this car from a friend. I borrowed this car from a friend just for a while. So these things were going on, but what happens? The news come that Fred Manson, he's been arrested by police in case of theft. No, it was quite shocking for Gracie Carter also and her parents also, because they were not all from the core of their heart or from internally, they were not in favor of their marriage. But now this was quite adding insult to injury for them. Like their son-in-law, before getting married to their daughter, he's already been arrested in case of theft. So what kind of theft was that? Actually, in those days, what people used to do, instead of sending some money orders, they used to put money notes within the envelopes, the letter envelopes. and he was a postman. He knew it well. So what he every time what he do, whenever he observes an envelope that is having some currency notes, he opens it and he tries to and he every time he steals all those notes. So in this way, he used to collect money and he used to hire a car and taking Gracie Carter to restaurants and all other places, good places. So he was actually thieving, he was actually stealing the money of the people who were sending their money from by putting the currency notes in letters. So one day he was caught. Now it was quite embarrassing for Gracie Carter also and her parents also. When Gracie comes home and she talks to her parents, now her parents say that there is no reason left behind that we would agree for your marriage to this man who is already, before he has already ill reputed us or caused a lot of insult to us because we were quite willing to marry our daughter with him, but he is a thief. So once is a thief, we cannot marry our daughter with such a person, such a criminal. But interestingly, the story takes a twist. Gracie Carter, she takes a stand. She says, whether he's a thief or a murderer, whoever is he, I will marry him at any cost. Now, her parents were again quite upset with her remarks and with her thinking, and they tried to convince her through every way, but she refused. She said that I love him and I will marry him at any cost. Her father says, George Carter says that if you want to marry him, if you want to marry a thief, then you should leave our house. You should stay somewhere outside. She says, I don't have any issues. I will leave this house. And then his father asks that if you leave this house, where would you go? She says, I'm an educated girl and I will do a job somewhere in a departmental store. The store is, the name is mentioned and it is on Brixton Road, the location of the departmental store. I forgot the name of that. It's Pancrean and Patrons, something like that. So after having lot of arguments, she left the house and she started, because she was intelligent, good looking also, beautiful girl. So she was uh, hired by the departmental store and she was given a duty to deal with the on ladies side. She started doing a work there. First, she shared an apartment with a girl, and then she was earning so much money that she could stay for her own. So she was not taking any money from her parents, and she started living there. In the meanwhile, this Fred Manson, he was imprisoned for 2 years. No, she had to wait for 2 years. Now, again, come back to this Ned Preston because this story has been told by Ned Preston. Ned Preston now says that when I went to prison, then I met this new prisoner, Fred Manson, who told me all this that I have already, discussed here. So he has told us, and when he meet Fred Manson says that you should meet Gracie Carter and tell her that I do love her more than anything else. So because for Ned Preston, it was his kind of duty and social work that every time he takes messages of the prisoners to their families, so he goes back to this Gracie Carter's house. In the house, he meets her mother, Mrs. Carter, and he tells her that I'm from. He introduces himself that I'm Ned Preston and I'm a kind of a social work for the prisoners. So I want to know about it. Mrs. Carter, she started crying and she started telling that she was our only daughter and she is living somewhere else. She is causing too much insult to us because she want to marry a thief and it is quite insult to us in this society. So she 2 or 3 times she just breaks into tears. But Ned Preston says that have you ever called your daughter to come back home or to stay with you? Then her mother, Mrs. Carter, says that yes, we went to her, we talked to her, and we wanted her to come back, but she is not willing. She said that she would only come back to home if they accept Fred Manson as their son in law, or if they arrange her marriage to Fred Manson. Otherwise, there is no chance for Gracie Carter to come back. So, in this way, Gracie Carter is still living outside, not living in her house, and waiting for Fred Manson to come back. Now he goes back, Ned Preston, and he tells everything to Fred Manson. And Fred Manson, he was quite, excited that she still loves him. And now he got address of Gracie Carter from her mother. He goes there. He tells her that I have come from, a jail, and Fred Manson had sent me a message for you. She was quite excited. You know, with excitement, she called him. Both of them they talked, and Ned Preston tells everything to her that he loves you more than anything else, and she also expresses same feelings to Ned Preston, and she asks her that deliver my message to him. And she also says the most important sentence, emotional sentence, you can say, again a type of human psyche, as we are when we discuss about S Maugham. So she says that go and tell this Fred Manson that it's not a matter of 2 years. Even if he doesn't come back for 20 years, I will wait for him for more than 20 years or for 20 years. And after that, I will not marry anybody else. I will wait for him not only for 2 years but ready to wait for 20 years. So this was quite a highly emotional sentence that Ned Preston has listened. So he goes back, he tells him. In the meanwhile, the conduct of Fred Manson, or behavior of Fred Manson, was quite good in the jail. So his punishment was reduced to 1.5 years or 1.5 years. So 6 months punishment was reduced. Now they were quite excited. Fred Manson, he was also waiting that when to go back, come out of jail and to meet Gracie Carter and marry. In the meanwhile, Gracie Carter, she had arranged a house of 2 rooms. Now she is earning much, and she is in a position to afford a good house, and she is waiting for him to come back. In the meanwhile, what happens? This Ned Preston, he gets some sort of disease, and he was ill, so he couldn't visit the jail for 15 days or for 20 days. In the meanwhile, this Gracie Carter, she goes to once or twice, 3 4 times she goes to jail and she meets him. But when somebody goes to a jail to meet a prisoner, so every time there is a policeman standing there, or you cannot have any secret conversation with the prisoner. So in this way, both of them, they felt so much embarrassed for each other. So Fred Manson asked Gracie Carter not to come in jail again. So wait for me till I come out of jail. She goes back. In the meanwhile, when Ned Preston, he gets well after almost 15 days, uh, then he goes again back to prison, and he meets Fred Manson. When he goes into the jail and he says that I want to meet Fred, the superintendent of jail, he says that he is somehow changed. Who is changed? Fred Manson. He says, the jail superintendent, he tells Ned Preston that the prisoner named Fred is, behaving awkwardly, or his behavior is utterly changed, completely changed. So author Ned Preston, he goes there. When he looks at him, he says that she still loves you a lot, and she is waiting for you to come out. But Ned Preston says, I was shocked when I listened this response from Fred Manson. Fred Manson says that go and tell her that I am not going to marry her anymore. I will not marry her. When he listened this sentence, he was quite astounded. He was quite, astonished that how can Fred Manson say that I'm not willing to marry her? What happened actually in those days? So he tries to ask him to Fred Manson that why are you saying so, because there was too much a long story between both of you and she's been waiting for you outside. You are here. She has left her parents for you, and why are you saying that you will not marry her? He says, I'm death sick of her. Death sick of her means he says that I've been thinking of her for past 1.5 years, and too much thinking. uh, she's always has remained in my mind, but now I'm no more ready to accept her. She has already obsessed my mind a lot, so I'm not going to marry him. When he said that, now the author says when Ned Preston said this sentence, that he said that I'm not going to marry her and I'm death sick of her, so everybody who was listening the story, they started laughing. In the meanwhile, the author and Ned Preston, they both started walking in the street. When they were walking in the street, author asked Ned Preston that it was not only the end of the story. So what do you think? Ned Preston says, I don't know, but he was too much obsessed with her love and thinking over and over again about her. It has made him so frustrated and so much obsessed with his own thinking that he just, psychologically, he wants to get out of this love to spend a normal life. No, author, he gives his opinion also. He says that he might be true because once a person he starts thinking over and over again all the time about one thing, it makes us mentally sick. So when you are mentally sick, you take big decisions. In this way, from emotional life he has come back to practical life. This was the discussion between Ned Preston and author. Now author asks her that what about Gracie Carter? Did you meet her? Ned Preston says that yes, I went to her and I told her that what has happened. First, her color was white and she was not that much upset. She was just, as he says that as I told her, her expressions were saying that a kind of she was already expecting something like that. That if it happens, it doesn't matter. The writer mentions in the story that it was for her that she has missed one train and she has to wait for the next one, and that's it. And here the story ends. So this was the story episode. Now let us discuss about its analysis. This sentence, imagination's an odd thing. It dries up. I suppose thinking of her incessantly all that time, he'd exhausted every emotion she could give him, and I think it was quite literally true. He'd just got sick to death of her. He'd squeezed the lemon dry, and there was nothing to do but throw her in. So, this was the sentence spoken by when Ned Preston and author, they were discussing at the end of the story that what happened actually to Fred Manson. At that time, author says these lines. He says that too much imagination. This is actually the soul of the story, the psychological analysis of human nature. When you are all the time you are thinking about one thing, you just become dries up, because there is nothing static in human life. If you start thinking only about one thing all the time, it will make you mentally sick. Like if you start thinking about, if you watch a movie and you start thinking over and over again about the movie for constantly 6 months or 1 year without thinking anything else, it will simply make you mentally ill or mentally sick, and you will yourself try to come out of it. So he says that he would quite thinking of her incessantly. Incessantly means continuously, constantly. So every time he was thinking of her, and all her emotions, his emotions, they were dried up. So too much thinking. He has analyzed, Fred has analyzed that I have already thought about her a lot and there is nothing left behind. So let's leave it. And he's again giving this example that when you have squeezed a lemon, so what is left? It's only the cover of the lemon that is to be thrown away. When your emotions are dried up, your emotions, your mind is filled, your mind is not accepting something with, because you have already thought about it a lot. So psychologically we are not in a position, or a human is not in a position to accept it emotionally. And what was this was sentence about thinking about Fred Manson, and the second, it seemed she had missed one train and had to wait for the next. And this was the analysis about uh, Gracie Carter. So both of them they agreed. So here we come to, if we conclude it, this story, or if we analyze it, you can say that it is a comparison between emotional thinking and practical thinking. Before you, as a story it progresses, it's quite astonishing that a girl who is having, too much educated girl, she's belonging to a very good family, she doesn't need to marry just a postman. I mean, if that's friendship is concerned, that's okay, but to marry a person, it's a bit emotional. But she is showing too much emotions. Even she left her house. That is quite difficult for a girl, even in those days. In this was the story was written. Now, most of the times when students they read the stories, so they start making comparison of Western society with that of Pakistani society. So most of the times these things happen in Pakistan, but they happen in another way. Here you cannot say that if a girl who belongs to a very well established family, she is a university student and she falls in love with a postman, or just like a low status person, having financially low status, and she goes to her parents and she tells that I'm in love with a low status person. So the parents, they would not have arguments with her. They will receive her with some kicks, slaps, and some bloody abuses. Parents in Pakistan, they do not indulge us in conversations and arguments. So their hands speak a lot when these things happen in our society. So things happen in our society, but they happen in another way, in quite funny way and in quite dangerous way. But because there is argumentation, she left the house. She goes there too much emotional in love, and she when she says that I'm ready to wait for 20 years, it's quite interesting that how a girl can be ready to wait for someone for 20 years to pass her whole life. She waited for 1.5 years. It was quite emotional, leaving her own home. Even this person, Fred Manson, he also says that whatever I did, if I have stolen someone's money from envelopes, I did all for Gracie Carter. And Gracie Carter, she justifies his theft in front of her parents, that he did everything for me. And he also claims that whatever I have done for her. And she believes. But here she is emotional, and writer is not also telling us, because crime has no justification. If Because when Fred Manson, he was asked that why did you do it, he says to Gracie Carter that I did it for you, because I wanted you to drive in a good car, I wanted you to take to good restaurants. I didn't have money, so I find it a good way that to steal money from envelopes and spending on you. So she was impressed that whatever he did for me. This was a crime. Here, apart from this psychological analysis, one thing everyone keep in your mind, that crime has no justification. If we, for instance, if we say that Fred Manson, whatever he did, it was acceptable, or it was, it should be pardoned, uh, because he did everything for his love, or for Gracie Carter, then you go to jail, you meet hundreds of prisoners, they have their own justification. Even a person who has murdered two, three-person, he would tell you, long stories about his murders, that why did he commit those murders. So everyone has a reason behind it. So if we start justifying crime, then there is nothing left practical, nothing left emotional. So here is the writer is having some sort of a flaw in practical approach. So emotional, both of them, they were emotional, they were extremely emotional, but the climax of the story is quite astonishing, quite interesting, because at the end no one is expecting that suddenly, without any reason, without any genuine reason, Fred Manson would say that I will not marry her, and she will say that for her it's just that one train is missed and second is coming. If this was their thinking, then what was the use to waste 1.5 years and all the time, and she was having too much quarrel or fight with her parents. So this is psychologically, once we this is just you can say, when we start moving with specific framework of mind, when we talk about love, we start thinking about our beloved, we start, over and over again, we become too much obsessed of thinking. It makes us mentally sick. And everyone who, those who are, wants to change their lives in when they are in such situations, they get only two ways: either they finish themselves or they come out just changed person. So this Fred Manson and Gracie Carter, they come out changed person instead of being, giving harm to their lives or giving harm to others or doing anything that is unacceptable. So here, human psychology has been told by the writer, that once we start thinking about one thing all the time, it is never a good idea, because at the end we will suddenly change and we will simply laugh at our previous acts, whatever we have done.